Using pure strength and brutality, we have destroyed everything in our path and have now arrived in the late game. Now that we're in the late game, we have gotten more options to wield even more big weapons and do the unthinkable and wear 2 big colossal weapons at the same time. In this video we will use maths and comparisons to go over the actual most powerful strength build that will just obliterate everything in the late game. This video is the late game and evolved version of my most powerful pure strength build. If you're starting a new playthrough, then you'll want to watch that one as well, as that will be the most powerful setup for the early and mid game, and you can make it the moment you load in a new character. So let's get right into the most important question: which weapons do we use? In part 1 I showed you that the Guts greatsword is one of the best colossal swords in the game, and you can get it at the very start of the game with very little effort, which makes it an incredible pickup. To be honest, with the build in part 1 you can just use the two-handed setup shown there to destroy the late game as well. It's really just up to preference what you want to use, and you can consider this video a second alternative strength build, namely the one where you use 2 weapons at the same time and thus are able to power stance your attacks. Due to the sheer power of the setup and because you're using 2 weapons instead of 1, it will obviously deal a lot more raw damage, but it will also alter your moveset and make you play the game in a different way. It's going to be less stat efficient and your equip load is going to go through the roof, because if you wear something like this then you're going to weigh a lot, and that will lead to some problems that we will talk about later in this video. But just to fulfill the idea of pure strength and completely smashing something into the ground, you might really just care about raw damage, and that's why this is actually the most powerful setup for that idea. So I went the distance and compared every single colossal weapon in the game. And ultimately the highest hitting pure strength weapons in the game are going to be the Giant Crusher and the Prelate's Inferno Crozier. These 2 weapons have the highest raw AR, meaning that they will hit the hardest. You also see that in the second position is the Staff of the Avatar, because it does in fact have 5 more points in AR compared to the Prelate's Inferno Crozier, but it will also require a high fate investment, and 24% of this weapon's damage is in fact classified as holy damage, and due to how resistances work in Elden Ring, it could very well mean that ultimately it will deal less damage compared to the Prelate's Inferno Crozier in many situations, as your mixed type of damage will have to go through several resistance modifiers from your enemy. Similarly, the strength related colossal weapon in the game with the highest AR is actually not one of these, but it's going to be the Rune's greatsword, as it has a higher AR than even the 60 strength requiring Giant Crusher, but it requires an investment in intelligence, and its damage is also spread between magic and physical damage, which kind of leads back to the same problems mentioned with the Staff of the Avatar. So it isn't really a pure strength weapon, and it also has a fixed Ash of War that you can change, and we do want a different type of Ash of War for this setup. The Rune's greatsword Ash of War is really good, however, especially if you revolve your setup around it and take talismans like the Alexander's Shard Talisman. And since Wave of Destruction just scales with your AR, you can go full strength with a Rune's greatsword setup and only get the intelligence requirement, and it will still deal a lot of damage. For some people this might be a surprise, as when you look at the Ash of War, it really looks like a magic type of Ash of War, or as if it would be heavily influenced by your intelligence stat, but in reality it just scales with your overall AR. Thus, if you want to use that and keep the intelligence requirement in mind, then it's a good alternative option as well, for sure. If you want to go for a similar dual wielding setup, you can even then combine it with the Guts greatsword from part 1, and you can then in many aspects just use the build shown in this video for that setup as well and be perfectly fine. Finally, if you want to spice things up, you could also use the Rotten Staff instead of the Prelate's Inferno Crozier. It has a lot less AR, but it has innate Scarlet Rot buildup, and pretty much any time you apply Scarlet Rot on an enemy in the game, it's a death sentence for them. So power stancing a Rotten Staff with the Giant Crusher is going to be a very viable option as well. As you can see, there's a lot possible, but long story short, today we will focus on the 2 hardest hitting pure strength weapons in the game, and the definitive winners in that regard are going to be the Giant Crusher and the Prelate's Inferno Crozier. So the power stance pure strength setup in this video will revolve around these 2 weapons, and in this video I will show you how to get the most out of the setup. You can pick up the Giant Crusher from the chest in the carriage near the capital, it's a really easy pickup. And then the Prelate's Inferno Crozier is a pickup from the Prelate in Fort Late. As you see, he wears it, and if you kill him, it's a guaranteed drop. After getting both weapons, you will definitely want to apply Royal Knight's Resolve on both of these weapons for the highest raw damage output. You can get this Ash of War in Volcano Manor, and it's just really good for getting the most damage out of your setup. As you see, it amplifies your damage a lot and almost just straight up doubles it with 80% extra damage. The thing with this buff is it's a really quick buff that you can apply on both of your weapons, but it also quickly fades away, so you actually want to use it during battle instead of preemptively. I did say no gimmicks in part 1, but for that reason specifically, applying the buff doesn't feel too tedious and actually just feels as a part of the fight. You also don't have to apply all 9 million buffs in the game to go for a one-shot setup to increase your damage like that and do the whole gimmick. That makes up for a nice clip, but doing that is just boring in my opinion. You can do whatever you want, but really even if you go as basic as possible and only use Royal Knight's Resolve, with the extremely high AR of the weapons, you will deal massive damage. And if you then reapply Royal Knight's Resolve like 1 or 2 times during battle, you will destroy whatever you're fighting within a few hits. So in this video, I will also show you the build without any additional buffs, just to show you that that playstyle is already really good as well. Also, subscribing to this guy on YouTube is also a very good thing to do, and I have heard rumors that it will increase your luck in life with a whopping 69%, so definitely make sure to do that right now as well if you haven't done so yet. If you don't want to use Royal Knight's Resolve, other good options are Lion's Claw from part 1. It's amazing in the late game, and I went over all the reasons why in that video, and it just staggers the most annoying bosses in the game really easy, which makes it a very good option. Otherwise, you can also use the massively underrated Royal Luke's Earthshaker Ash of War that you can purchase after that fight. It's really good actually, especially for when you're just exploring, as it quickly destroys everything around you. There's a lot possible, and you can just mix it up between these Ashes of Wars depending on how you're feeling, but all of these are definitely good options. So let's talk about stats now. The Giant Crusher does require 60 strength, so it's definitely a late mid-game to late game weapon. And if you followed part 1 to get to this point, then you should be close to that by now. If not, get at least 60 strength before you start using this setup. Assuming a level 125 cap to show you that this build is actually OP at lower levels, you ultimately want to get 70 strength, because we will get the soft cap of 80 strength with our Flask, then get 50 vigor to make yourself really tanky and beefy and being able to sustain hits, which goes really well with the slow but hard hitting type of build. Also get some mind like 20 or so minimally to make sure you can use your Ashes of Wars comfortably without needing to drink every few seconds, and then put the rest in endurance for the stamina and equip load that we will use. If you want to go to 150, then I will get 60 vigor if you feel like you still die too much, and put the rest in endurance. Otherwise, you could also put all the extra points in endurance for a bunch of extra stamina and equip load, and so you can actually get medium rolls with the gear when you don't use the Flask, and get even better gear if you want really. Doing that will also pretty much just soft cap you on endurance. The flask that we're going to use is going to consist out of the strength not crystal tier that we also used in part 1. It's just plus 10 in strength for free essentially, and for this setup just one of the best crystal tiers. And it will soft cap your strength out at 80 with relatively low stats and still make you have enough points in the rest of the stats. And then the other crystal tier might surprise you, but it's a very good crystal tier for when you have so much weight as us and are still relatively low stats. You'll want to pick up the Windy Crystal tier. This one is also really close to the capital. You can pick it up west of the minor air tree right here. What it essentially does is increase your maximum equip load with a whopping 450%, meaning with all the heavy stuff that we are wearing and the absolute crazy equip load that we have, we will go all the way to the light load category, and it lasts for 3 whole minutes, more than enough to destroy every single boss in the game with this build. And it's really nice because you are in the light load category with this very heavy setup, and you can use those light load rolls. For your talismans, you still want to use the Great Jar Arsenal that we picked up in part 1 and combine it with the Earth Tree Favor +2 talisman that you can pick up in the capital after you kill Malekith. If you're not there yet, just use the Earth Tree Favor +1 until you get to that point. These two talismans are just very useful for HP, stamina and equip load with a tanky strength build like this, and makes it so that we're not overloaded with this setup, because as you can see, our equip load is absolutely crazy right now, and you want to prevent being overloaded when we're not using the flask, because when you're overloaded you can't even move or jump or do anything really, so that's for sure something you want to prevent. Then you want to use the Claw Talisman for the increased damage to our jump attacks, because you definitely want to use jump attacks with these weapons when you power stance them. And finally, a very good fourth option is the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman. It's a defensive talisman and really fits the idea of this build. It reduces your incoming damage with a whopping 20%, and it just makes you very tanky and gives you a bunch of extra sustain, so you can still get a beating in every fight while you destroy whatever's facing you. If you mostly use one of the damaging Ash of Wars, then you can also swap in the Shard of Alexander instead of this talisman, because that talisman will increase your Ash of War damage output with a 15% increase, so it's definitely a nice talisman to consider as well. For gear, the only specific piece that you want to pick up this time is going to be the Raptor's Black feathers in the Sage Cave in the Alts Plateau region. This piece will make our jump attacks do even more damage, and that's exactly what we want. For the other 3 pieces, just use whatever gives you the most defensive stats while not making you over encumbered. For example, this setup with the Bullgoat's Greaves and Gauntlets, which have the highest defensive stats in the game, and the Banished Knight's Head helmet that we picked up in part 1, will give you a bunch of stats and make you go over the 50 poise threshold as well, which is really good while still keeping you in the heavy load category. With this setup, I would say it's actually acceptable being in the heavy load category when you don't use your flask for whatever reason, as with the incredible sustain, hard hitting weapons, and the fact that jump attacks just come out very fast no matter your equip load, it makes it definitely not the worst to be in the heavy load category when you don't use your flask.